Hello you, and welcome to the last daily rundown of the week with me, Dan Morfitt. You're watching Channel 7 and this is the show where we look at all of the day's big stories. Tonight we'll be discussing, amongst many things, class action for Hillsborough victims, a BBC quiz and healthier smoking. Plus we'll be chatting to Regina Di Giovanni about the untrendy ancient Egyptians. I have no idea what that means yet. But first, let's welcome tonight's guests, who will supply the daily rundown with insight and attitude. First of all, it's barrister and author of Just Your Average Muslim, Zia Chauhdry.
Hi Dan.
Thank you for coming back. Do you want updating on the Villarreal-Liverpool scores we continue through the night?
I think that's appropriate.
0-0 at the moment, I've been told. And if you're watching the repeat of this, Liverpool won 17-0. Amazing. Also on the banquette, a man who has always dreamed of making the world's greatest theme park. Lacking the money and the know-how, he's become a comedian instead. It's Eddie Hurst.
Hey, hello everyone.
Somebody's got to have a dream, and that's a big dream.
It's a big dream, so I've taken it back a bit. Thought, what's the second largest money pit I can think of? Professional comedian.
I believe Jimmy Carr was in the same boat.
Yep.
Literally, it was a log flume. Zia and Eddie, thank you for joining us as ever on the Daily Rundown. And don't forget, you can get involved too. The show is as interactive as you like. Join in the conversation on Twitter at The Daily Rundown, or at the very least, give us a follow. We want followers. It would be lovely. Our first story tonight is about Labour. Jeremy Corbyn has a party in crisis after Ken Livingstone was suspended for comments made defending an MP accused of anti-Semitism. The party leader said that there were grave concerns about language used in a BBC interview by the former London mayor. MP John Mann, who called Mr Livingstone a Nazi apologist in a public confrontation, has also been reprimanded. The Labour MP had been referring to comments Mr Livingstone made about Adolf Hitler. His comment was, "Let's remember when Hitler won his election in 1932, his policy then was that Jews should be moved to Israel. He was supporting Zionism. This before he went mad and ended up killing 6 million Jews." The row was prompted by the suspension of Labour MP Naz Shah over comments she made on moving all Israelis to the United States on social media. So who is wrong and what is right in this instance? Zia, I'll come to you first. What do you think of this utter mess that seems to have got the Labour Party in a spin today?
They're in a real tizzy about this, understandably so. It's undoubtedly the sort of main news item today. But when you stop and think about the right or wrong answer, you can begin to understand why it is that they're getting themselves into a tizzy, because it is such a complicated area. Sensitivities all around, issues of freedom of speech, but then where does that line have to be drawn before you start offending people? Are you offending people by criticising policies and getting involved in political debate? And I think that's really what's brought this to the fore. And there are those people, cynics maybe, who pose the question, why now? Because Ken Livingstone has pretty much had these views for a long time. You know, he's famous for them. And he said something today which, you know, as offensive things go, as it happens, it's not the worst thing that anyone's ever heard. And so, you know, exactly why has this come to the fore a week before elections?
On that then, do you think Ken Livingstone is an anti-Semite or an anti-Zionist? And it's a very important distinction.
He would say that he's an anti-Zionist and certainly not an anti-Semite. And I'm inclined to agree with that assessment, because one of the things he said, for example, was that what he was referring to was a historical fact. So it wasn't just some gratuitous, let's have a go at some people. Now, either it is a historical fact or it isn't. You know, he's either right or wrong on that. But he hasn't been gratuitously offensive to anybody or any race. And I always take the view that if you're raising issues of what appear to be legitimate concern, even though sometimes your language might be a little bit risky, it doesn't necessarily follow that you're anti-Semitic, you're racist. And so I wouldn't put him in that bracket.
And the comments as well from the MP Naz Shah, who he was sort of backing up, they didn't read as anti-Semites either. It was on her social media profile. Is this just another risk for politicians, do you think? Because it again, another argument, Eddie, that started on social media and has now come in the main news focus of the day.
I just hear every part of this story. It's just this is uncomfortable, because there is a lot that there's a lot of nuance, there's a lot of specifics, like with the anti-Semitism and the anti-Zionism, but also with the social media. I believe with Shah, it was before they'd gone into politics, before they'd become an MP, am I right? Which, sure, it's of
This is
public
very
interest.
old news,
Yeah,
really,
yeah,
that
yeah,
someone's
yeah.
picked up on.
And it is, obviously, it's of public interest. And I think it sort of highlights that people should have a bit more responsibility on social media, and that we live in a world now where anything that you say will be kept forever, and it will be there for anyone to be able to go back and find and catch you out on it, which is why I am, for one, being very careful right now, because I don't really know what's going on.
On that though, with Naz Shah, she's already done a very long, sincere apology for this, and it was so long in the past for her, ideas can change. That's the whole point about being a politician, isn't it? That you can be swayed by opinion and facts.
Mature enough to evolve, mature enough to rethink matters. And she's somebody who came into politics recently, said this on social media in the past, seems to regret it, has come out, as you say, with the apology, an apology that many Jewish people have said, yep, that's fine, and she's on the right path. I mean, I was listening to David Baddiel today, who was, was certainly not critical of hers, saying that maybe her language could have been tempered, but day in, day out, we use language that maybe in the cold light of day we probably wouldn't. But that was a very heated issue. It was Gaza, wasn't it, in 2014, and that got a lot of people very vocal, very animated. And so to find that she was as well is no great surprise. But she's had the sense to and the maturity to rethink that and say, well, no, that was out of order. I'm sorry, and these are the steps I'm going to take to ensure that doesn't happen again, and to prove that I want good relations with other people. So really, you should take that at face value rather than create a controversy out of something that very much was history.
From the outside looking in as well, this whole story seems to be more about a media reaction to it, rather than major Jewish groups or people that represent the Jewish faith in the UK. In a week where we've had Commons votes against Syrian children refugees coming into the country, a week where we've had the historic judgment from the coroner's courts regarding Hillsborough, this just seems like a massive own goal by the opposition and Labour today. And Jeremy Corbyn being so connected with Ken Livingstone, it's really not looking good for him either.
Well, I mean, I don't know what Eddie's take on it is, but again, the cynics are saying, well, this is really all about Jeremy Corbyn and his leadership rather than what we're actually arguing about. But
well, I think there's been a solid 2 to 3 weeks of the Conservatives mucking up, and then there's been Hillsborough, which was a Conservative government that were putting that forward. So for the media, it's been like, well, the Tories this has been bad news. And all of a sudden, there's been something with Labour that has been newsworthy, that's been the other party. And so, well, hold on, guys, we need to, let's just ring the media bell. We've got a day out. Come on, guys.
Yeah, the news agenda has completely shifted. And what has helped that is one Labour MP having a go at another Labour grandee in Ken Livingstone in public. And it all seems quite bizarre. Looking into this, and I've done some research into it, I know what Ken Livingstone said might have been inflammatory. He called Hitler a Zionist at one point. But there is an agreement from 1933 called the Havara Agreement, which is translated as a transfer agreement, between Nazi Germany and Zionist German Jews. And it was signed in 1933. And the agreement was basically a homeland for Jewish people in Palestine. It sounds fabricated. It's not. It's a real agreement that happened. And as we know, that didn't go ahead, and instead the Nazis went through with their final solution. So, from an outsider looking in, from using some journalism, what Livingstone has said today might not sound great, but he's not wrong on any of it. So, are we getting overheated because of the topic rather than the content of the topic?
It's a very sensitive topic, isn't it? It always has been. Always will be, and it's one that people are very cagey about getting involved in. Ken Livingstone's the kind of guy who's been around the block, he's been there for long enough, and he will say what he wants to say. But other people, and you've got a lot of more junior politicians today within his party who are all distancing themselves from him and saying, oh, it was disgraceful, and yes, he should be suspended. You think, well, hang on a minute, just stop and look at what he had to say. And rather than taking the sting out of this situation, you're actually ramping it up, which again then begs the question, what's this all about? Because these are the very same people who, were so anti-Corbyn for so long, and that dust seemed to have settled, and now suddenly there's a huge cloud of it once more.
Is there that problem as well, Eddie, with Corbyn, in that he's attracting these type of stories because, and the cynics amongst us would say, people are out to get him. So they will take the smallest molehill and possibly create a media mountain out of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very telling within this that whereas often there is a focus on facts and figures and news stories, there's very little actual look deeper beyond what's happening at the surface level. And maybe it's just because it's breaking at the moment, but there isn't much of a... Like, even when I was trying to read up on it earlier today, I was trying to find out more about Zionism and more about the Palestine-Israel, sort of the issues that they've been having. It's very difficult to find not only something that's unbiased, but also something that isn't just so heated and so much about the emotion. Because, it's a very emotional thing. It dominated the 20th century, and the fallout of it, we're still experiencing it. It's tough. But I do find it surprising that there isn't a lot of specifics. There isn't a bigger discussion, a wider discussion isn't happening. Maybe it will, but there's been stories about Israel and Palestine. It comes up every few months in the news. There's something about it. I think it was a few months back there was the Israel boycott. Some places were championing a boycott on Israel things because
and that it was made illegal for councils to have anti-Israel policies. There is a lot going on with this, and I think it's going to rumble on. If I was Ken Livingstone, I probably wouldn't have hidden in a disabled toilet to get away from the media. That seems to have only made it bigger, but this story will probably rumble on for the next few days. Right, time for a quick break now, but the three of us will be back in just a couple of minutes' time to discuss more of the news on the Daily Rundown. Pop a cork or just boil the kettle, and we'll see you in a couple of minutes.